If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Hello and welcome to episode 16. In this episode, we will be interviewing playwright Monica Cross. So Diane, what's going on with you?
We just finished a round of toned down version of Game of Tones on my Twitch channel, and it went really well. And I think we're going to make that a habit for Camp Nano events. I've got Writer's Conduit coming up. We've mentioned that a few times on the podcast, so I'm not going to go into details. Just the website is writersconduit.com, right? And it's online conference, writers conference, all on Twitch with Twitch writers and our guests. And it's going to be basically like a regular online writers conference, which is now a thing that's a thing, I guess, since the pandemic. And yeah, only it's all going to be on different Twitch channels. And then I have a Kickstarter coming up for my new book, which is going to be happening in June.
So you should add one more project just to make sure your brain explodes. I'm just saying.
I should add one more project?
Yeah.
I have time for this? No. How about you? What's happening in your life?
Well, not much. We've been rearranging the house. I got my first haircut since the pandemic started, so I'm
nice.
Feeling pretty suave these days.
Oh, yeah. I finally get my first stabby on next week. So.
Oh, nice. Congratulations. Yeah. I have had my second stabby, and it is just maxed out in effectiveness. So I am allowed to go out and do whatever and breathe in people's faces and everything. So.
Fly and be free, my friend.
Well, I don't plan to do that. I still plan on doing the masking thing, at least in public, because
good idea.
I haven't been sick in like 2 years because of this. So I'm just gonna.
I've never taken my mask off, and that's why I don't miss hay fever, my seasonal flu. None of it. I'll pass. Thank you.
I haven't gotten any of that stuff. I mean, my allergies are still bugging me, but it's been nothing compared to usual.
Yeah.
So before we get started with our guest, though, I do have some announcements to make. Starting next episode, our format is going to be changing a little bit. Instead of doing book recommendations at the end of every episode, we're going to be adding new segments with a number of reoccurring contributors. I'll still be doing book recommendations every now and then, just not every single show. And we'll have contributors who are not co-hosts of the show, as well as co-hosts of the show, adding things at the end. Each contributor will have their own topic. For example, we may have segments on world building or writing tips or TTRPGs or I don't know what. I'm just naming some things that are possibilities that are out there. And that way we can keep bringing you new things all the time. Each segment will be about the same length as the book recommendation, so probably about 5 minutes in length, more or less. We'll try to have one of these segments per episode, though we might have more some episodes and we might not have any on some episodes. It'll just depend on how we all come together.
I think this sounds like it's going to be great fun, Alan. I think it's going to add something unique to this already kind of unique podcast.
Right. I don't know. I hope so. I got some ideas from some things I've been doing. And I figured people are probably tired of hearing me talk about books all the time. And we know so many interesting people, we should bring them on.
I never get tired of hearing you talk about books, but it will be cool to get some of the people that we've made friends with over the course of doing this to come back and talk about their area of expertise on a semi-regular basis. And that's going to be great.
Yeah. So speaking of that, some people that we do have coming on already lined up. We have Rick Claypool, who's a research director for Public Citizen and a science fiction writer and a former guest. If you don't know Public Citizen, they're a very pro-human rights, or like anti-corporate kind of organization. They tried, I shouldn't say anti-corporate. They try to keep the corporations in line, basically, and keep them from breaking the law and hold them in account, you know what I mean, for their actions.
Yeah, he was cool.
We also have, again, Chevway, Donald Ekpeki lined up to talk about African publishing a couple times a year. So both those guys are lined up, and I'm excited to hear what they have to say.
That makes me really excited, too. One thing that's really hard to do is in our little Anglo language speaking North American niche, it's really hard to find out what is going on in the rest of the world in science fiction and fantasy. And I'm always interested. So I cannot wait. And I'll discover authors that are as good as the authors in Dominion. Oh my God, they were so amazing, Alan.
Yeah. Did you finish Dominion?
I'm not finished quite yet, but I have been reading through it. This is some good stuff. This is great.
Did you read The Unclean yet?
I did not read The Unclean yet.
You should make that the next one you read.
Okay.
It's my favorite story in the whole book.
Okay.
It's just amazing. Oh, anyway. So we should probably get to our guest.
Yes.
So when we get back, we will have Monica Cross with us. Hey all, you know that here at If This Goes On, we believe that a rising tide lifts all boats. Life is not a zero-sum game.
Aurelia Leo Publishing believes the same thing. If you haven't heard of them, they're a publisher that focuses on disabled, queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, and other storytellers of color.
They intend to pursue their mission further with their new podcast, Aurelia.
Twice a month, Aurelia will feature reviews, interviews, and short fiction produced by or about disabled, queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, and other storytellers of color, hosted by our friend Zelda Knight.
They are kicking off with interviews of N.J. Ember in a series of short stories by Edmund Chuso and Miko Rahala, published in the Infinite Metropolis collection.
If you want to hear more about disabled, queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, and other storytellers of color, check them out at aureliapodcast.com, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Okay, and we are back with Monica Cross. Monica is a playwright and director living in Florida. She earned her MFA from Mary Baldwin University, formerly Mary Baldwin College, in 2013. She has taught theater at community and college levels. Monica's first full play, Wonder of Our Stage, was a winner of the 2018 New Play Festival at the Players Center, and was produced in their 2019 Summer Sizzler series. Her newest play, The Aria of Julie Daubigny, was a 2021 O'Neill semifinalist. She was a fellow at the Hermitage Artist Retreat in 2019 and is a proud member of the Dramatists Guild of America. So, welcome, Monica.
Thanks for having me.
So, how bad did I mess up the French? Pretty bad, huh?
I don't speak French, which for someone who has written at least 2 plays with French characters is kind of a trip for me. But I think you did a pretty decent job based on what my dramaturg told me.
Okay.
I do a little conversational French because I took French right through school in Canada. It's not great, but it's enough that I was able to read the signs in Montreal. So, and not, crash into anybody on the road. Sounds good. Yeah. Julie, it would be more like Julie, right? Because it's a softer J, right? Dauvigny. And I love her, by the way. She is a very cool person, and I cannot wait to hear more about this play, actually.
Oh, she's amazing. And the minute that I found out about her, I was like, she is a cross between Cyrano de Bergerac and Casanova, but is a woman and like a historical figure. And so I really wanted to write a play about her that gave a woman a chance to play this like fantastic, strong, sword fighting woman who's having love affairs left and right, and I've really enjoyed working on this
Rescued
play.
Her lover from a monastery, her female lover from a nunnery, right? She was
from a convent.
Yeah.
She burns the convent down, or at least the room where the girl was staying, and the two of them make an escape together. She also like fights 3 men, I guess in succession, maybe in duels on the same night, because she's at a party and kisses a woman, and 3 guys decide that is an unacceptable thing to do, and so she, I think, kills all 3 of them.
Yep, that's the way I remember too. There's a really, if you don't,
yeah, she's fantastic.
Yeah, if you don't know who she is, there's a really great bio, a little mini bio on her on Extra History on YouTube. Right, they do a really great job. I'm like, I want to be this woman when I grow up. Okay, so yeah, very cool.
Well, now with my play, you can.
That's amazing! Yay!
Oh, yeah, she sounds awesome. Why have I never heard of her before? People need to get out there and make movies about this person. Jeez.
Well, I could talk about queer erasure, and I could talk about, the erasure of significant women in history, but you know all this stuff, Alan. That's why you haven't heard of her.
I do. I know. It was like a rhetorical question,
Yeah.
And since I wrote my play, I've also heard of 2 musicals, another play, and I think a one-woman show all about her as well. So I think that right now people are very excited to rediscover that history.
This is awesome. But we don't want to focus, of course, on just one thing that you're doing, right? Because one of the things that got us both excited is that we don't know a lot about the world of science fiction and fantasy theater, and we would love to know more. So tell us a bit about that. How did you get involved in that? Why is that something that is a focus for you?
Well, I have always been a sci-fi fan myself, and I was studying Shakespeare in graduate school, and there was an opportunity to take a playwriting class. And so I was like, well, there's no science fiction plays. And like, side note, I think that Shakespeare and science fiction have this glorious, long, intertwined relationship that really deserves to spend more time on stage. Mm-hmm. So I fast forward a little bit. In 2014, I discovered that there was a conference called Stage the Future, the first international science fiction theater conference. Wow. And so I submitted a paper and I flew to London, and there were about 40 of us the day that I was there, because I could only stay for a day. And we all sort of came with various papers about how we had searched and searched and searched, and there was a dearth of science fiction theater. And after each of us presented our papers, we kind of realized that with 40 of us in a room together, each with our own history and corner of the field, there was actually quite a bit. And it just hadn't been documented yet or collated, and it wasn't being discussed in those ways. So after that, there have been a lot more mainstream over the last 5-6 years where science fiction has become more visible.
I'd agree. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I'd say like all over the place, honestly, especially with everyone points to the Marvel movies and Game of Thrones, really bringing out the science fiction and fantasy, I think. But it's interesting to hear about it appearing more in theater. Now, like, I can think back, I mean, and you also mentioned Shakespeare too, so this all goes together for me. Shakespeare, there's a lot of fantasy in Shakespeare. I used to be an English teacher. I used to teach Macbeth. I mean, that's basically a fantasy play. I mean, there's witches, there's ghosts, all kinds of stuff, right?
You bet.
You get Hamlet, you have The Tempest, Midsummer, and you also have Tolkien very sort of famously disagreeing or not liking the fact that the trees moving, from Birnam Wood to Dunsinane as being a metaphor, so he wrote trees that could actually walk. And, those sorts of conversations happening between Shakespeare and prominent science fiction and fantasy authors sort of from the beginning. The other thing...
Yeah, I totally see that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
The other thing is that I feel like there's been sort of a loss of the science fiction theater tradition, or like the plays that have existed haven't been brought into the sort of standard theatrical canon. And we can theorize about what those reasons might have been. But somewhat famously, when those of us who are writing in science fiction theater or are writing about science fiction theater point to as like the reason why this genre is so important for stage is that the play R.U.R. by Karl Kopek, which was a play from the 1920s, and is the R.U.R. stands for Rossum's Universal Robots, and is actually...
Yeah, I mean, that's where the whole concept comes from.
The word robot comes from R.U.R., from a play. And so that is a really fun, historical moment for science fiction on stage. And then it also has so many other, crops up in so many other places, like lots of stage adaptations of 1984, of Frankenstein, of Slaughterhouse-Five has stage adaptations. So...
Oh, I'd be interested in seeing
right.
that.
It's
like, how would you even do that?
I think that it's usually done with a kind of abstract set and maybe a lot of projections. I've only seen photos, but yeah. I actually remember as far back as in a high school reading and doing a project on Slaughterhouse-Five and discovering in my research stage adaptations and like the controversy surrounding stage adaptations, well, any, Slaughterhouse-Five sort of in general, as sort of backlash for, oh, it's too scandalous, or whatever the controversy was at the time, right?
Right.
Right. So, yeah, I think that there is a history that, again, may not be thought of as science fiction on stage. But one of the things that was so fascinating about going to that conference was the keynote speaker was, I am going to forget his name, but the director of the Arthur C. Clarke Award for Science Fiction was the keynote. And
wonderful.
He gave a presentation on like what science fiction theater could be, what science fiction theater should be, but one of the things that he talked about was the science fiction theater that we don't necessarily recognize as science fiction theater. And he proposed the term replicant theater in the same way that replicants don't necessarily always know that they are replicants, and in the same way that they can pass as human in certain regards. Science fiction, when put on stage, doesn't necessarily look that different from plays that are not science fiction, because of the way that theatrical conventions work, right? You can say,
oh, I like that.
Now I am invisible, and now you're invisible. Just like you can say, like, we have skipped 16 years, and now we've skipped 16 years. And he, one of the things that he sort of jokingly posited is that Peter Brook, famous director and someone who's written a lot about theater, he said that theater is a man walking through space. Now he's talking about like a theater space, but he's like, so if a man walking through space is theater, then we've got science fiction right there. It's a man in space. And so that was kind of a fun
That's great.
thing. So like the problem then becomes documenting that. And do we really want to spend all of our time saying this is science fiction or that's not science fiction? When it's very slippery. Is a play that is critical of government overreach that is set in some nebulous dystopia, is that science fiction or not, right?
That's an endless conversation that has gone on in the entire genre forever, right? I'm reminded of how Margaret Atwood has vehemently argued that her work is not science fiction because science fiction has ray guns and spaceships and her stuff can really happen, right? And I'm just, it pisses me off on a base level.
Right. I mean, I have a very open-ended, like, welcome everything sort of approach to science fiction and fantasy of like, if we want it to be, then it is. And I think, so I very much so err on the side of being inclusive because I just want to be able to celebrate everything. But it is a question of like, how do we talk about science fiction on stage, or how do we make science fiction on stage more prominent when, well, if you do a Google search for science fiction theater, what you're going to get are a bunch of episodic teleplays from like the 60s because of the way that television co-opted theater for a time. So that kind of makes it difficult to find. But then also when you have so many plays that can be included in that canon, but aren't because they were never called a science fiction play, it makes it difficult to be visible.
There's so we're talking about, genre and the classifications between genres and stuff. And then we're talking about theater, and theater kind of always seems to be shoehorned into capital L literature. You know what I'm saying?
I was about to bring this up.
Yes.
Right? I wonder if this has something to do with the genre ghetto, right? There appears to be a trend, right? Well, it's not a trend. It's been going on forever. Right?
Well, I mean, even the Margaret Atwood quote, I mean, her trying to distance herself because she's marketed as a capital L literature writer, right, instead of a science fiction writer, even though, most people that read science fiction don't care one way or the other.
Yeah, exactly. But go ahead.
Oh, there's this really interesting, highly academic article that I can get you the information for later about I think it's called like the genre effect or something to that, in that vein, that where they took two passages. They did a study where they took two passages, and one of them has like he walked through the door into the cafe, and the other one has he walked through the airlock into the ship's galley. And it's the same passage, the same thing has happened, it just changes whether they're people, humans or aliens, where they are located, that sort of thing. And then they asked people which one was more literary. Or they had some way of asking. I think people only read one or the other, and then they scored its
which was the better, which one was better, how
right,
or rather ask them to rate the story and say, was this a good story, what do you think of the quality of writing? So I read the study. Yeah,
and so the study actually has conclusive proof, some sort of statistically significant data that proves that genre fiction is inherently considered less than or less literary.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So that's unfortunate.
It is. Okay, I was actually wanted to move backwards a little bit in some of your comments, because you had talked about putting science fiction and fantasy on stage versus it being, capital L literature on stage or what have you. And you mentioned that, so someone could, if they're invisible, they can say, oh, I'm just invisible now, right? My question to you is, how do you decide that's how you want to represent that versus using like props or costuming and that sort of thing? And do you feel that props and costumes add, or do you feel that they kind of take away from the play?
Great. That's a wonderful question. I approach it slightly differently when I'm directing versus when I'm writing. When I am directing, I like to use spectacle and movement to tell stories. When I'm writing, it depends on the piece. I might be more interested in leaving it open to collaboration with a designer. So I might leave a piece up to interpretation, or I might make a specific choice about it. And there was actually a piece that I wrote that is a sequel to Cyrano de Bergerac, where Cyrano is on the moon as part of his afterlife, which is something that is discussed in Rostand's play. And he encounters the personification of various vices while there. And in an early draft, I was like, this can be anything. And I was working with a dramaturg who was like, Monica, you need to nail that down. So after several drafts, I made a couple of choices, and that became something that is a person in a series of masks moving through the stage and is physicalized in a very certain way. So I think that props, costumes, practical effects can all be wonderful parts of the story, depending on how you use them and what you want to do with them. Because I think that if you are trying to, do the old Star Trek style, like, we're on a flat surface, but we're all going to throw ourselves in our chairs across the room effect on stage, that creates a certain level of camp, which if you are going for, it can be interesting. But if that's not what you're going for, that can pull your audience out, and that can lead to an idea that seems to persist with some theater makers, that science fiction doesn't work on stage. Versus there can be very effective things done with lighting. A playwright by the name of Bella Poynton has a number of really gorgeous science fiction plays, and one of them takes place on like a long-term spaceship with a android or some other form of artificial life form and a human captain, and the entire story is about their relationship and spans thousands of years. And part of the way that works so well on stage is by having a light that is maybe behind a pane of plexiglass that the artificial light form stands behind when powered down, and other effects like that can be done very effectively on stage without shifting the play unintentionally into camp.
I think there's lots of ways to do that, right? Like, first of all, people made Cats. People made Wicked. Nobody said this was campy.
Right.
Okay?
Yes.
Right.
I've seen
I
them
was thinking
both.
about Cats as well.
Right.
Right? Come on. Second thing, right? If you don't want to go for all the stage and costuming and wires and the whole bit, and you don't have the budget for that. Okay, so I remember being, I think I was 15, and I saw, our school put on a play. I saw the performance of Camelot, right?
Yes.
Camelot has this scene in it, and they do it this way in the movie they made in the 60s too, which is very interesting, right? Where you don't see the joust, right? There's a joust. Lancelot is jousting. You don't
Right.
see it. What you see are the crowd, right? Who are, moving their eyes back and forth, and, they're like shielding their eyes from the sun, and they're watching the joust, and they're describing what's going on, right? I remember really, they sold it to me. I visualized the joust as a kid. I saw it. I knew what they were, it really, it worked. Right? And then they interacted with Lancelot after the joust was over, and they did this the same way in the movie. If you can do that, right? And then, like, years later, and this was very recent, this was like within the past 5 years, Jamie told me, right, my partner, he told me about this really great play that somebody had done where it was War of the Worlds. Liam Neeson was doing a narration kind of role, and they were doing a lot of things with lights and music, right? And you can watch this on YouTube. It's on there. Somebody put it on there. I watched it, right? It reminds you, I think it was the 80s, so it's a bit rock opera, right? But it's so cool, right? And a lot of things that were going on were hints of shadows in the background. You saw these long shadows that looked like the legs of the tripods walking and all this kind of stuff. And with that in the soundtrack and the narration, that's all you needed. You felt, like you were in the middle of this great big conflict that was going on, that the Martians were coming. There was, smoke and light and noise and shadows, and, and that was watching it on a little YouTube screen on my computer, so I don't see why it can't be done.
I'm over here laughing, just imagining like Journey or Styx writing the score for this thing, right?
Oh yeah, that'd be great. Totally.
Pink Floyd. I don't think it was Pink Floyd, of course, but it sounded like Pink Floyd to me, the soundtrack.
Yeah,
it was great.
That's awesome. Shakespeare in A Winter's Tale has a line. Paulina is about to unveil the sculpture of the maybe questionably dead Hermione. And she says, "It is required you do awake your faith." And then she pulls back the curtain. Now, depending on the literary analysis that you want to do on this play, like either Hermione has been dead for 16 years and then suddenly this sculpture springs to life, or maybe Paulina has been secretly like keeping Hermione alive and in hiding and is now revealing a woman who is pretending to be a statue so that she can make this reunion with her husband more palatable. But however you choose to read it, there is this moment of stage magic where a person is standing where a sculpture is supposed to be. The actors say, "This is a sculpture." And then someone says, "That sculpture is so realistic, I think it's about to breathe." And then a woman steps down from this pose that she's, that this sculpture has been in, and reunites with her husband and her long-lost daughter. These things can be done so simply on stage and with so much grandiose effects, depending on how you want to do it. But it's all about the story that we're telling, and it is required that you awake your faith. and that you enjoy the story that the theater actors, directors, cast, and crew are all putting on when you go into a theater.
Yeah, suspension of disbelief is always required, right? So, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you've been working to kind of document science fiction theater. What have you learned about this during the process? Like what kind of, I don't know, what information do you think we might want to know about what you have learned?
There are some great theaters out there that are doing specifically science fiction and fantasy. There's The Navigators in New York City that is specifically feminist sci-fi theater. And then there is The Other Worlds in Chicago, and they do science fiction and fantasy. And I think they also do some like improv LARP stuff, which is super cool. So if you have access to either of those cities, I highly recommend checking out both of them. But there's also so much being written right now. I have a playwriting friend, Scott C. Sickles, wrote a trilogy called the Second World Trilogy, which he wrote sometime after the 2016 election, and theorized about a split in America. So there is a Christian fundamentalist Confederate States, and then there's the rest of the United States. But it's told from the point of view of two children who are pen pals across the divide. And the first play is about them as children. The second play is about them as adults reuniting. And I won't give away about what the third one's about, but I was absolutely heartbroken by this story because it's both a little bit about politics, but it's also about global warming, and it deals with sort of where we could end up as things, worst case scenario sort of stuff, and that can be staged so simply, right? Because it's two kids writing as pen pals, and yet it's this great epic sci-fi trilogy. Each play is a full-length play.
Sounds wonderful. Science fiction has, we've had this conversation, I'm sure you've heard it, right, many times, where we're like, okay, science fiction is actually about now, and we either examine something that exists as an issue right now and put it in a different environment where it isn't so charged. Or we look to trends and go either, okay, this could be good or this could be bad. What are the logical consequences of continuing on this course? And we talk about those things. Or it's about, speculation about what we could find in terms of exploration, be it scientific or physical, right? So, and sometimes social exploration, right? Like, Alan's going to shoot me, but of course it was a story before it was a movie, right? The movie was called The Arrival.
Oh yeah, Ted Chiang.
Yes, exactly, yes. Right? Like that was, that was a good example of a social exploration, right? How thinking in different terms and different languages might change our relationship with the universe and how we interact with it. And, and that's what science fiction does. That's what it's supposed to be about. Of course, this has been going on in playwriting as well as in books and movies and short stories and everything else. But I feel like it doesn't get as much attention. What would you like to see in terms of ways that it could get more attention? Like, how can we, I don't know, help people find this? How can we shine a light on what's going on in this field right now?
Yeah, I definitely think that it's producing more science fiction theater if you are a producer, but that is a small segment of the
Right.
population. But it's also about going to theater anytime you find out that there is a sci-fi play happening. And sometimes that's difficult to know because, like, for instance, one of my favorite sci-fi plays of the past decade is a play called Mr. Burns, a post-electric play. Now, post-electric definitely tells us that there's something interesting about it, but I've heard people say that they didn't even recognize it as science fiction, even though it takes place in a post-apocalyptic world.
Mm-hmm.
And if you heard that and thought, Mr. Burns, is that about The Simpsons? It is. And the playwright, Anne Washburn, went into the writing process with the thought of what happens to a piece of pop culture after that culture no longer exists. And so the play starts off in, like, around a campfire, and people are trying to remember an episode of The Simpsons. And it's not until about 15 pages in that someone wanders into camp, and then they start asking him questions. And it's at that point that you start to find out that, like, various cities have been burning and lots of people are dead, and the nuclear power plants weren't shut down properly in time. So now there's a nuclear wasteland just out there, and then you jump progressively further into the future and you kind of see how The Simpsons evolves over the course of the play. And one of the things that's fascinating about it is that in the third act, and I won't explain too much because it's really something that I think should be experienced, but there is sort of a play within a play. The actors come out and perform a story for you, and that's the entirety of Act 3. So there's no onstage audience, which from a theater theory point of view is very interesting because it makes the audience the only audience for that piece, right? So I like to think that there's a way in which the world of the play extends in that moment beyond the stage to encompass the audience, and that in fact becomes an act of science fiction or an act of time travel.
Sure.
So, given that here's this play that is Mr. Burns, a post-electric play, and it doesn't say that it is science fiction, that might not be something that immediately jumps out at people as like, oh, I should go and see that because it's science fiction. But I think that when something does come onto your radar of like, oh, here's a new sci-fi play or here's a new fantasy play, I'm going to go and check that out. That's really the thing that will help make science fiction theater more visible.
Awesome.
Okay, cool. Okay, we're getting kind of close to the end of our time here.
Yeah, I feel like I've been dominating the questions here. Is there something you wanted to ask, Alan?
No.
I'm sorry, I'm just so excited about the topic. It's so interesting. I really wish, actually, that I'd, thought about maybe bringing Jamie on or talking to him about this beforehand more, because he has a background in theater, right? And he is a keen science fiction fan and has been his whole life, right? So I'm sure he would have much better questions than I will. So I'm going to make him listen to the episode. And then that way, if he thinks about 10,000 things that I should have said, right? We can have you back and then I can say them. It'll be cool.
No worries. This has been an interesting conversation, and I can't say I've ever talked to anybody in theater before about science fiction,
It's so cool. You know, like, I was at a conference about 2 years ago, so a little ways before.
Wait. What kind of conference? Was this like a con, like a science fiction con, or was this like a theater conference?
No. This was ATHA, the Association for Theater and Higher Education, and it was kind of my last academic conference before I stopped teaching at the college level and started writing full-time. And so I went to a panel on science in theater, and one of the panelists was talking about robots that she works with in an emotional living laboratory, and they work with robots that can hold small conversations, specifically designed for working with people in elder care.
Neat.
And she was talking about the ways in which she uses acting techniques to program robots to react in certain ways. And that was fascinating.
That's cool, actually.
But what was even cooler is that after the fact, I found out from a colleague that was there that she was looking for someone who would write a play specifically for one of these robots, and that colleague had given her my name.
Nice.
And so we connected, and I wrote a short play. It's about 10-15 minutes long, about a woman who has been told by her doctor that she has to take this robot home. And, you know, she's recently widowed, she's just lost her wife, and she's grieving, and she doesn't want this robot. And then over the course of this 10-minute play, they become friends. And so it's not really a science fiction play. It is a science play in that this technology exists now, but it actually is written so that my hope is that one day we will be able to get together and she will be able to program the robot to perform in the play. And that would be so cool.
Yeah. That's interesting, huh? All right, so because we are running out of time, I got a couple of very quick questions for you, and then we got to ask you our closing questions. How about you suggest some plays or playwrights that everybody who listens should know about?
Well, I've already mentioned Anne Washburn. There's also Claire Kitchell, who has written for the TV show the OA.
Oh, okay.
Right? She's written plays as well. And Scott C. Sickles, I highly recommend his work. And there's also this place called the New Play Exchange, which I would recommend to anyone who's interested in reading new works, particularly works that may not be making it to mainstream play publishers. That's where my work is. That's where you can find the work of Scott. And you can, I think, depending on the level of membership, you can search like specifically for science fiction plays or fantasy plays. And so you can search the database for brand new plays of varying lengths. And it's $10 or $12 or $20 a year for access to, I think they're up to 40,000
Wow, that's excellent.
scripts.
Wow.
And that's all genres, right? The science fiction corner of that is going to be somewhat smaller. There's also a feature where you can bookmark playwrights and watch them. So it will tell you if new works of theirs pop up. So if you are on there and you find that there is someone who's writing science fiction and you're interested in that, you can definitely check it out. There are so many short plays and up through full lengths. So it's really a great database because you can find someone, read a shorter play, decide whether or not this is someone whose work you want to pursue further, and then read longer more stuff by them. And oftentimes there will be like supplementary materials. So if there's like a video or they've done an audio recording of it, those sometimes get posted there as well. The playwrights have control over their own work, so they really get to share as much as they want. So that's a great resource for anyone. And I realize that like reading plays is not how we write is not the medium that we've written them for.
Right.
But it is a great way to sort of begin to see what's out there, particularly if you are in a community where you can say, like, hey, I found out this really cool play. I don't know if you'd be interested in putting it in your next season, to a local theater, that sort of thing.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to tell Jamie about this because that is something that might interest him. We occasionally look for community projects that we can do. Currently, there's no real theater collective type thing going on in town that I'm aware of. That might be something that might interest him to start. It certainly would interest him to produce science fiction. He has produced plays before, so there you go.
Huh, interesting.
We, most of us have not been doing much theater in person. Broadway is planning on reopening in September, and that's kind of the...
Oh yeah, this is a few months away, obviously, but yeah.
Benchmark for stuff, even if it's not the best benchmark for stuff. Broadway, that is. But there has been a lot of Zoom theater. I've had a number of short plays produced in that format while we've been in lockdown or the theaters have been closed. And it's actually been great for getting to work with people that I never would have been able to work with before because of location or geography.
Yeah.
So that's been a very great way to... There have been a lot of things that we have all mourned about this time, but that's also been one of the things that has been a great comfort during this time is the ability to work with people all over the place.
I gotta say, I did go and watch the play that you sent to us, the beginning of everything, and I was pretty surprised that like a play acted out over Zoom was good as it was. Not because I doubted your writing or anything. I just it's like Zoom, you know what I mean? Like I go into Zoom and I'm like, okay, I'm at work talking to somebody about boring stuff. You know what I mean? But it was very well.
Right. Thank you.
I imagine Twitch would be a great medium to put on a large scale play too, right? Because you can actually just stream what you're doing on Zoom, right? So that's an interesting. I should think about that.
Yeah, as I say, that's like a whole new format.
I definitely saw a play on Twitch, and it was actually a D&D adaptation of The Taming of the Shrew. I believe it was called The Gaming of the Shrew.
Interesting.
And so that was performed on Zoom this past year, on Twitch this past year. And I don't know exactly how they streamed it to that. I don't know if they used Zoom or not. There have been a lot of challenges with audio quality and various other things.
Yeah.
We feel your pain.
Connections, all of those technical difficulties that we've been navigating. But it has been a lot of fun to, again, use that creativity. Like, what can you do when all you have is a face inside a box?
Yeah.
And can you really make a story that works towards that rather than something that is meant for stage that has to be now confined to a little box?
Yeah, I think that's part of what I was trying to get at too, because I was expecting it to be kind of just like flat and I don't know, like not as expressive as it was. And I was also thinking that, okay, like, what kind of props are you going to have in a Zoom call? You know what I mean? Like, what's that going to look like? As we discussed earlier, that's one of the reasons why I thought of that question you know, and in your particular play, they didn't really have anything, which was totally fine. And it worked great, especially because of the topic and the interaction and their setting. You know what I mean? It was actually kind of worked more for it because, well, just to give them some background, the play is these two people on a generation ship basically, and there's just like talking about basically like how bored they are with everything, and they just have these very like blank backgrounds, you know, and it kind of really reinforced that idea of like nothingness and nothing's new, and it's kind of
cool. I haven't seen it yet. I did not get a chance to watch it. I've been so overwhelmed, but I'm going to have to.
You're only
watch
working
it.
on 20 projects, you know. I mean, come on,
Yeah,
Diane.
I am totally.
Push harder.
Yeah, I know, right?
I understand. I
need a
definitely
clone.
understand.
But anyway, we do have to wrap up. So we have to ask you the final questions. The first of which is, what is giving you hope right now? And boy, let me just say, do you mind if I say where you're from?
Oh yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, so you're from Florida, so I'm imagining you're feeling probably even more hopeless than the rest of us right now.
I am a Florida native, so and I actually just finished writing a play about Florida culture and life, and it's called The Search for the Swamp Cabbage Man. And so like I understand or like I am used to how bizarre Florida is in every way, and can like look at it with, you know, like that, oh, you sort of glance, being a Floridian. But for me, I think the thing that has really given me the most hope over this past year has been finding a collective of playwrights. Someone who has become a very dear friend posted on Twitter about like, hey, if I started this thing, would anyone else be interested? And I kind of wrote back and was like, if you build it, they will come. And from that, we have grown into this group of writers. We get together 2-3 times a month. Sometimes we just get on Zoom because we're all over the place, really all over the world. We'll get on Zoom and we'll just pull up plays that we've found on the new Play Exchange and read them together. And I've discovered so many fun new plays that way.
Cool. And
we encourage each other. We go to one another's readings, and having that community that spans the globe has been so invaluable.
If I can put in a bit of a personal, encouragement here, right? I'm not very wealthy. I never have been. I live in a relatively small area, right? Canada is big. It is difficult to travel long distances. If I'm lucky and there's something I want to see, people bring it to Vancouver, which is still a 5-hour drive for me, right? Most often they don't. They do it in Calgary or Alberta or Edmonton and say, well, that covers Western Canada, right? Except that's an 8 to 10 hour drive for me, right? So I don't get to see as much quality theater as I would like to. Also, cost of tickets are becoming more expensive for obvious reasons. I'm not complaining about that. People have to get paid. The fees to use things have to get covered. The costumes have to be paid for, right? It's all got to be done. But I think that don't stop doing Zoom plays just because we're all, the pandemic is going to be hopefully a thing of the past soon. There's still a market out there. There's lots of people like me. They want to see more theater. And if they can see it on Zoom, they're in.
That has been a huge discussion. I think that on the one hand, a lot of theaters find that the production values of recording a performance at the level that they want to charge tickets for is cost prohibitive in the minute that they can get back on stage they want to. On the other hand, I have a $15 a month subscription and I can put on whatever play with my friends I want, I mean, like anything that I write, right? It becomes my venue. I can't go downtown and rent out an events venue because they can charge like 3 times as much and put weddings in there. But for $15 a month, I can produce my own work. And that has been an incredible opportunity for me. And so I think that will continue, particularly for sort of grassroots theater and people who are sort of doing fringe work, which a lot of science fiction definitely falls into.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome.
Sure.
Keep us informed when you've got stuff coming up. We'd love to let our our listeners know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly.
So where can our listeners find your stuff and you?
Well, I am on Twitter at The Roaring Girl. There's no spaces or dots, just The Roaring Girl. I have a website, www.monicacross.com, and all of my plays are available on the New Play Exchange.
Awesome. So, I mean, I wish we could keep talking to you forever, but unfortunately we can't. I still have like 10 questions for you. So, maybe someday I'll get to ask them to you again, or maybe we'll cross paths at a conference or something, which would be really cool.
That would be great.
But thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Maybe we can have you back sometime. I've really been enjoying this conversation too. I was really excited to do it, and I'm really glad that you came. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
And so that was our interview with Monica Cross. So we've got a few things going on that we'd like to talk about real quick here. Diane, you have a Kickstarter, right?
I do. I am doing a Kickstarter to help fund the publication of my novel, A Few Good Elves. It is the first in what is going to be the Toy Soldier Saga series. I have published quite a few stories in the series in various venues, including a novella that was part of a book bundle a couple years back, that limited edition, so it's not in print anymore. But this will be the first novel in the series that I'll have published, and it's kind of the culmination of a project of many years. This was my first NaNoWriMo novel. I did it 10 years ago in its first draft, and I cannot wait to see it published. And by the time you guys hear this, the Kickstarter should be live, so just search A Few Good Elves Kickstarter, and I'm sure you will find it right away. It's a few bucks gets you the ebook. A few more bucks will get you some collectible bookmarks and, fancy behind the scenes stuff, right? I think it's going to be $30 for the trade paperback, or either $25 or $30. I think I have to bump it up to $30. And $50 gets you a signed hardcover. So
awesome.
And then we should talk about our Patreon, which we're not very good at promoting, but we'd like to point out that we do have one, and you can find that at patreon.com if this goes on. If you would like to support us, a couple bucks gets you access to, I'm looking at Canadian prices, so it tells me that $3 Canadian, so I imagine that's probably like, what, $1.50, $2 American?
Probably $2.
Yeah, gets you access to our Discord's community, right? So we talk about science fiction books and stuff going on in the genre and things like that, right? At probably this will be $5 US because it's $7 Canadian, right? It gets you all our extra episodes and articles, as well as the Discord access and whatnot, and you get a discount to Kat's classes at the Rambo Academy for Wayward Writers, which is pretty awesome. There's some really cool stuff going on there. I've got like one course there right now. I'm planning on doing a second one on world building, which I haven't gotten together yet because I've been so busy, but there's really cool stuff going on there. And then at the third tier, right, probably that's $10 US because it says $13.50 Canadian, right? Mm-hmm. In addition to all of that, you get entered into ebook giveaways. the occasional on-demand course giveaway from Kat. You can vote on interview choices 2 times a year, and you get your name in. You can get your name in the credits. So yeah, it's just a couple things, but it's like extra access. Direct involvement with, if you want to write science fiction and fantasy, then it makes, and these courses aren't expensive anyway, right? So it's a really good deal to get a discount on them as well. It makes them very accessible, and you're contributing to what we do, and we really appreciate all the support.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for saying all that stuff about our Patreon. I appreciate it.
Well, I figured it was my turn. You're usually the one who promotes it, so yeah.
Awesome. So, what did you think about our interview with Monica?
That conversation was every bit as awesome as I hoped it would be.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I think the science fiction community is really hungry to connect with live theater that is, involved in the genre, right? Like, I think we love science fiction and fantasy regardless of what form it takes.
Mm-hmm.
So
most of us do.
Yeah, well, I think so, mostly, right? And, there's so many creative people who would just love to see and get involved in genre-specific theater. I mean, like, I know a lot of people with backgrounds in theater, and most of them are lifelong science fiction fans. I mentioned my partner,
Mm-hmm.
Jamie, right? But there are
Mm-hmm.
quite a few other people. I think it's one of those, remember how I was talking about at the beginning when we said we were going to do this, how all these different communities and subcultures are kind of like a Venn diagram, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think theater is one of those circles that goes into the Venn diagram here, and that there's a bunch of people who are really excited about the same kind of things, like Comic-Con and like, role-playing games and like, science fiction, fantasy stories and whatever that crosses over in this Venn diagram. And I think that probably because of the genre ghetto in academia, right, they're not connecting, right, to this.
Could be. It just baffles me that I never hear about theater. And the funny thing was, Monica approached me about doing this because I never even thought about theater myself. It just never comes up. It just never, ever comes up.
Maybe we can be part of the steps to changing that, because I'd sure as hell like to see more of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there just needs to be some kind of awareness, and it's just baffling to me that no one ever talks about it. Or maybe they do, and I'm just missing it. But I would say in the mainstream of science fiction, that either people don't know about it, or they don't think it happens, or if they do, just nobody talks about it. I hear so much more about live role play podcasts and stuff like that,
right?
But I never ever hear about theater, like actually going to a theater and watching it.
I definitely want to have Monica back on sometime, because we did spend most of the time basically making the case for science fiction theater. And I, barely got a glimpse of what's going on in the field. And I would love to know more about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think I mentioned this at the end of the interview that I have so many more questions to ask. I feel like we barely even scratched the surface. We spent the whole time talking about like, what is this? What does this look like? And with authors, you don't need to do that because everybody is reading something, right? And so you don't have to.
Yeah, it's true.
So we didn't really get to do that deep dive that we usually do, right?
Exactly. Definitely a conversation to continue. I love theater and I love science fiction. They go together so well. We need to help make this a bigger thing.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about that. We'll see what we can do with that. I am ready to review a book.
Awesome.
Are you ready for that?
Yeah, let's have it. What are you currently reading?
Okay, so I'm going to review a book called Witch Piss.
I love it immediately.
It's by a guy named Sam Pink. It was published by Thumbs Down Press in 2014. That's a little bit of an older one, and I'm just going to tell everybody this is not a genre novel, even though it sounds like one.
Okay, that's cool.
So by now everyone probably knows that we know Rick Claypool. So this author was suggested to me by Rick Claypool and also another guy named Gabino Iglesias, who is a fairly well-known writer and critic. Randomly on Twitter, it came up and we got into this conversation about this author. So I immediately said, okay, let's check this out. And within a week or two of that conversation, this guy Sam Pink was on there saying, oh, I've got a few of my novels sitting around. If anybody wants to buy one, I'm selling them cheap and I'll sign them. You know what I mean? So I was like, well, this is obviously, it was just meant to be. So
right.
I went out and picked it up. So again, not genre, not science fiction, not fantasy, and not horror really, though certainly there is the horror of reality and the attempted escape from reality through fantasy. So this is a really tiny novel, probably more like a novella, maybe even a novelette. I don't know. But it's about a guy who makes friends with a homeless guy who lives in the doorway of a warehouse close to his apartment. Or let me scratch that, because I'm not actually sure if the narrator was also homeless, but it doesn't really seem like it because he's constantly buying the homeless people stuff. He just never really talks about himself at all, though. He's just kind of like the eyes through which we see anything, but we don't know anything about him,
Right.
Anyway, once he makes friends with the homeless guy, he meets other homeless people and starts hanging out with them. And really, that's the entire book. There's not a ton of plot, the way that a lot of literary books can be.
There's nothing wrong with a good slice of life story. I enjoy them
that's
too.
Basically
so that's
what
cool.
it is. But there is kind of an arc, and there is a point to what's going on. So it's not like one of these books or, that's just okay, here's this stuff, the end, as some literary novels can be.
Right. It connects. There's a theme. There's a consistent narrative. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I get you.
To me, the real highlight was Sam Pink's ear for dialect and just language in general. Listening to the characters talk really brought me back to some of my early days when I was a little bit of a street rat in Youngstown and in San Francisco. I was fairly impoverished and at one point nearly on the street myself, especially when I was trying to live in San Francisco. It was just so expensive.
Right.
So, and these people just seemed totally real, like some of the people that I knew back in the day, right?
In my senior year in high school, I was what they call the invisible homeless, right? Okay. I left home early and I lived on a bunch of friends' couches for a while. So, yeah, I get you.
I did that for a while at the end of college, but it was more, it was about the same time in Youngstown and in San Francisco. And I'm not going to say it was because I was just totally broke. I could always have gone to my parents for help, but I just refused to. And I had some strained relationships with my parents at that point in time as well, I would say. So, anyway, not about me. Let's get back to the book.
Right.
So the people really seemed real to me. And to me, the book was also about society's failure to improve the human condition. And about the triumph against the odds through small kindnesses. Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I mean, it packed a lot of punch for a tiny little book about nothing much, really. I was kind of sad, very emotional at the end of it. It was pretty intense.
Well, now I want to read this.
Pretty intense.
So, and I really do actually want to read this. I think this would be very interesting.
Well, I would tell you, and especially knowing that you're a fast reader, it would probably take you like a day or two. The book is probably 120 pages. And the pages were fairly small pages. They weren't like these huge pages you get in these anthologies. You know what I'm saying? Or some of the trades,
Yeah, I may have been guilty of doing that at one point when I put out an anthology.
Yeah.
It was like 160,000 words because there were so many great stories I couldn't say no to, so the print was kind of small. Let's just say that.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I have the ebook version, so it's different there.
Cool.
Anyway, so read the book if you're interested in more literary kind of work, great dialect, and, meditations on the human condition.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
Bye.
If This Goes On, Don't Panic is edited by Alan Bailey, with production by Sound Maiden. Our theme music is by Father Flamethrower. Additional music is by Christopher Slydrowski. And outro music by Sable Aradia. Intro by Dave Robinson. A special thanks to our guest, Monica Cross. And thanks for supporting us. We'll see you again soon.